Weather's always been central to people's lives, and it remains central to a lot of people's lives. About a quarter of the Australian economy is completely weather dependent. But we do have a generation now where, if you're in certain lines of work and you don't have a garden or a dog to walk first thing in the morning, you can actually live without really being affected by what the weather is from day to day, at least during the working week. And we can weatherproof a lot of our environment. So because of that, I think a lot of us don't pay the kind of obsessive attention that our grandparents might have to conditions around us. But of course, weather's also, part of trivial conversations. It's a kind of social lubricant, as one of the people I interviewed for my book put to me. And in fact, a very good one. I mean, if you didn't have it, you'd want to invent it. And so although a lot of weather talk is characterised as being boring, it's actually a pretty fundamental way that we connect with each other. I think if we're looking at climate change in Australia and how it's understood and how that's reflected in politics, we've got to keep in mind that Australia's always had a highly variable climate, especially when it comes to rainfall. And that poem where my country, drought and flooding rains, that line, drought and flooding rains, actually resonates for people who are both, worried about the environment and perhaps concerned that climate change isn't real, or believe it's a fabrication or an exaggeration, because the natural variabilities meant that we've always had unpredictable things happen in weather and climate. And in terms of rainfall, you can get places that get almost no rain for a year, then we'll get 300 millimetres in a inland depression or something like that in 24 hours. So through all of this, I guess one of the things that's happened where the public knowledge of how variations in weather occur has improved a lot, because the science has improved over the last 50 years, is when it comes to El Nino and La Nina. And so this is a kind of climate fact that depending on temperatures in the Pacific, we might have in Australia a cooler, wetter year or a hotter, drier year. And these are all probabilities, they're not set in stone. But people now learn to associate climate events like that with actual changes in what we experience over a given season. But that's experienced as weather and not as climate overall. And so with climate change, where you've got a gradual change, which doesn't manifest itself in a particular thunderstorm or a snowfall where you go, that was climate change, where really the whole system is changing. It's hard to ascribe the degree to which particular severe weather events can be linked specifically to climate change. And that's made the politics of it all the more difficult as well, because one of the common refrains, and it's not just in Australia, you hear this everywhere, when there's a severe weather event and then people bring up climate change, and you get the response, how insensitive at a time like this to talk about climate change. Now, my personal view is that's exactly the time to talk about climate change, but it needs to be done in a way that acknowledges, I think, that, first of all, extreme weather events have always been around, and they always will be, and that perhaps it's unhelpful to try to sometimes, I know that the science is moving closer to being able to do this, but say 20% of this event was climate change. I think when the system starts to change in the ways that it is now, it's more helpful probably to say, this is the sort of event that's X times more likely in a climate that's actually changing. But it's very hard to disentangle weather and climate, even when you don't bring the climate change debate or discussion or policy discussion into it. And so what we seem to have now, I think, is legitimate confusion in some cases about how best to attribute extreme weather to climate change and what that actually might mean.